Hi, I'm Steve Sapato, and you are listening to Speaker Talks podcast and the Happiness Agenda. Sometimes we get to cross over because we have people who will absolutely change it up for your business and for your life. And today I have the great pleasure of bringing on Latonya Peguese. And Latonya, are you there?
I'm right here. How are you, Steve?
Yay! And we've been playing a little ping pong here on trying to get her on the show for about the last hour. So it worked out good. She's here. I'm here. Hey, you're here. So it works out great. So I'm glad you all came and are tuning in. So, uh, Latanya, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you here today?
Well, sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And it's so great that your listeners are tuning in and everybody's together with us today. But I'm originally from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then I graduated from Howard University, which, of course, is getting a lot of attention these days because the vice president of the United States is also a Howard University graduate. So studied lots of science and math there, and then moved to Los Angeles and did a lot of work in low temperature physics research, satellite engineering, just all kinds of really cool things. And I had worked at NASA too, so forgot to put that in there. In the
Gee,
Greenbelt, Maryland,
let's see. I scooped ice cream for a while.
and I love ice cream.
But that's, the reason I said something like that was because if you haven't heard Latanya speak, what do you speak on?
Unconscious bias.
Oh, no. Not that we might accidentally talk down to somebody or talk about somebody or anything like that, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead. You worked at NASA and now you're on your way other places.
Yeah, so it's just a long story, but I've done work in the entertainment industry. I've been an on-air radio announcer for a program, have done all kinds of things in the entertainment industry, including helping to create a category for the Grammy organization. So it's just all these things, and my background is just so different. But yet and still, when it comes to me doing the training and speaking and consulting, etc., as a result of all my out of this world experience, just really helps to bring a whole different perspective. And my clients tell me I help them to bring transformational change to their organization. So that is a happy agenda,
That
Steve.
is a happy agenda. That's right. And that's one of the things when we talk about what can we do for each other. The reason I have Latanya on is because when you hear her speak, not only is she happy, not only is she fun, she brightens up the area, but she's also got so much to contribute. And when we talk about biases, everybody goes, well, what's a bias? What's an unconscious bias? And so tell us a little bit about that, would you?
Absolutely. And so the thing about it, ladies and gentlemen, is just don't think of it as like this big word. Think of it as just simply a blind spot. When you're driving, sometimes there's things that are around you that you don't have a clue about, but it's in the way, and it could potentially have a problem for you when you're driving.
And
So,
that's most people in Florida. They have no idea what's around them.
oh, okay. But there's social stereotypes that come about because certain groups of people and individuals from outside their conscious awareness have them. So, say for example, you're a Zapato, I'm a Peguese. We all have these lines of generational knowledge that we have that have come throughout the centuries, and so things that were relevant, Steve, 100 years ago still might be a part of who we are as humans, our makeup, if you will. But that doesn't mean it's relevant today. So basically, unconscious bias are blind spots that we have. We all have them. So sometimes it gets a bad rap, or people are like, yeah, that's the unconscious bias group. No. We all have them. So in a nutshell, it's just about their biases and blind
But
spots.
give me an example.
Okay. Well, sometimes people who are from different parts of the United States, or no, I'll do this one. I'll do sports teams. So some people, they've got their sports teams. They love their sports teams. And even when they're not getting to the national championship every year, they're going to just hold on strong. But yet and still other people are like, how can you stick with this team? They haven't won a whatever national title in 100 years. But you can't tell that person anything there. And if you talk about them or, talk about their coach, the players, the organization, woo, even that might be true. They haven't been winning. So there is some truth there. But the blind spot is you can't talk about my team. That's my team. I'm taking one for the team, and you are not going to talk about them. So of course there are situations that are a bit more. Well, some would say those are fighting words. But as far as in the workplace and even what we do recreationally, sometimes there are problems where bias is a big problem.
Well, and that's just it. A lot of times we take certain things for granted because we have this built-in bias, and we'll talk about something which is natural for us, which other people either won't understand or maybe just disagree with, right?
Yeah. And all bias isn't negative either. Okay. I'm wearing yellow. You're wearing white. You have a red background, burgundy background. That's the bias. That's how you were feeling today. That's what you wanted to have, and so all bias isn't negative. Did you have lunch? Did you not have lunch? That's a bias. Some people don't eat breakfast. Okay, fine. That's not a
Yeah.
negative
Why
thing.
why wouldn't you eat breakfast? What's wrong with that? Right?
Exactly. Why
Just
I'm
like
an early
y-
riser? I'm a
I
night owl.
yeah, I got one that I just it makes me nuts because I'm not a drinker. So if you go someplace with somebody and they go, "Hey, what are you drinking?" I go, "Oh, I don't drink." And they go, "Why don't you drink?"
Mhm.
Well, wait a minute. I just saw a comedian on there. He says, "Well, when you don't get mayonnaise on your sandwich, do I go, why don't you get mayonnaise? What's wrong with you?" Right? So that's a bias. When we actually quiz somebody else, why don't you do what I do? There's a bias sitting there waiting, looking at you. Because sometimes it affects how we think of other people. I mean, I know because I've grown up around drinkers. I started my whole lifetime career out of college as a IBM salesperson. And when we'd go to our events and go to our after party or after dinner things, people would like light up their cigars and sit at the bar, and they'd go, "Okay, I'm buying a round of drinks. Safato, what are you having?" I'd go, "Diet Coke," and they go, "No, you got to drink alcohol." I go, "No, I just want a Diet Coke." They want, "I'm not buying no freaking Diet Coke," right? And they'd pass me by because I didn't believe or didn't do the way they thought I should,
And
right?
what
That's a
happens sometimes, Steve, is that people feel a little different. So, if we have a different perspective, that if everybody is doing, we call it group think. So if the group is thinking a certain way, but then someone comes up with another idea, the group might be like, man, I wish that were me too. And so sometimes their group guilt gets in the way, and then they want to point a finger at the person who's doing something differently. And then because of their uncomfortableness, and so it's not necessarily, something, I mean, it feels personal, but it's just more of like how the it's like, oh my god, well, gee, I feel terrible because I'm drinking and I really don't want to drink, but I'm pressured to drink, so I'm drinking too. So sometimes these kinds of things happen.
So, does bias hold us back? Is it an obstacle? Is it something that is good for us? What is that all about?
Well, it's a mixed bag, Steve. And so what happens is that all bias isn't bad. We talked about that, but the question becomes, well, where does what causes this negative bias? It's wrong information. So say for example, there's sometimes people will lie about other people. They'll say things that are not true. They'll purposely say things that are not true. But the thing about it is, when they're saying things, they didn't do their research or their homework and find out, well, what's the other side of this coin? Who else is having some challenges here? What else is going on? So what they'll do is they'll take that bit of missed opportunity to be able to share something and find out the other person's perspective, but because they didn't do a little digging first, then they'll go and just tell it. So like they say, bad news travels fast, but the good
Oh yeah,
news takes a while to get undone from the bad news. All right.
that's the thing is bias can really affect most of us in terms of our opinion. So it's like let's look at gossip as an example of that. If somebody says a bad, negative gossiping thing about somebody,
Mm-hmm.
whether we want to believe it or not, it has affected us internally. So the next time we deal with those people, those words are hanging back right in here and creating a bias for us, either for or against that person. So it's natural when we speak, and that's why people like Tanya and I always say you got to say great things about people. When you're in your office, you can't say negative things. I know people do, but it's like, do you know how much harm that does versus great things about somebody? If you've got the right manager who's always talking people up, if you're that manager who is always talking people up, and that's who you want to be, because that way you're saying, like, if I say, boy, that Latanya, she's a hustler, she's a doer, she really gets things done. The next time or the first time you run into Latanya, guess what you're going to be thinking already? Wow, I got to get to know her better because she's the mover and shaker. Whereas if I'm the negative manager or the negative speaker, I go, I avoid Latanya like the plague because blah, 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 blah. And then when you meet Latanya, you're going to be going, I'm not sure I really want to be around Latanya because of what I've heard. Now, you may not actively think that, but it's a bias that affects your judgment. Right, Latanya?
It can. It absolutely can. And so I've learned a long time ago, even before I got into this business, is to hear someone else's perspective. I can hear something negative about somebody, but I want to know for myself, because I've had an experience where I missed out on a relationship with a really great person only to find out later that all the things that people were saying about them were not true. It was somebody who was offended, like we talked about with the drinking example. They felt uncomfortable. And so as a result of their uncomfortableness, then they went and smeared somebody else that I could have had a great relationship with. And then sometimes, like somebody that we admire, that they're, we feel like they're done wrong or we're offended. It's like, oh, how could you say something about my favorite sports person? But do the research. What did that person say? What did they do? Maybe they really did do an offensive thing. Maybe they really did lose the game and they really weren't winners. You'd be surprised how many people treat their teams like winners when they really lost.
Well, what, and going along that same line, what I find fascinating is that we will blame, like the whole game comes down. Let's talk football. I'm not a big sports fan, just so you know, but when it comes down to football and it gets down to the last seconds, right, and the kicker has to come out and kick a 50-yard field goal, and he shanks it. Boom, it's no good, and everybody goes, "Man, that kicker, he's terrible. He ruined the game. He lost the game for that team. What a horrible person he is." And you're like, wait a minute, that's a bias. Everybody thinks that kicker lost the game. And you go, wait a minute, how many passes were dropped that could have been touchdowns in the event? How many other things happened? Who dropped the ball? Who didn't run hard enough through the line to, all those things combined. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's always amazing to me that some people have that bias, and they'll have that for a long time. I don't remember who the kicker was, but I remember that there was way back when, 20, 30 years ago, there was somebody who missed a game, well, let's use the ball. Let's see, there was a kid in Chicago that caught the ball before it went, like it was going to be an out. The Cubs player, I think, was going to be able to catch it, and that would have ended the game, and the Cubs would have gone on to the World Series. But a kid in the stands, or a guy in the stands, reached out and caught it above the player's glove. And for 2 years, that guy had to be on protective custody because all the Cubs fans were going to beat him or kill him. And you're like, it didn't come down to one play. If the Cubs would have beaten them all the rest of the game, that play would not have mattered.
There were balls, there were misses, there were fouls, yeah.
But they all blamed that guy. He was that guy, and it was the curse of the Cubs goats or something. I forget what it's called, but and that's what we find fascinating, is that we will have these biases. People who didn't know anything about that guy will hear that horrible story and blame that guy. And you're like, wow, I'm not sure, but I think he had to change his name. But
see, that's just it, Steve. Sometimes people don't even want to know the truth. They have their truth, their perspective, and that's what they want to hold on to. And they just narrow in sometimes on the wrong thing. And so when we talk about, undoing bias, you got to really, there's this whole way of just approaching life that needs to start being undone. I call it undoing bias. It's like once you realize you've got it. And like we said, it's not all positive and it's not all negative, but yet and still, do we have, one of my sayings that I've coined, Steve, is it takes courage to undo bias. So if you're not courageous, because sometimes we get into these points where it's like, whoo, do I want to go there? Because that means I have to admit that I've got to work on me. And some people feel like they're perfect. I know someone right now who thinks he's perfect, literally.
Wait, you're looking at me when you said that?
Uh-huh. Both of my eyes.
Yeah, look at that. What's that all about? Yeah.
What does your wife have to say? That's what really matters.
Yeah, don't ask. We're not going there. No, but that's exactly right. Some people never, we were talking about, I'm trying to remember who we were talking about, but some people never accept the responsibility. That's one of my big things in today's society, is that people always want to blame somebody else. And truthfully,
for what they did themselves.
A lot of times it is.
Look what you made me do. Because this is what? We weren't even around when you were doing that. How
you made me do that? I knew what you would say about me if I didn't do that. So you made me do it.
Accountability and consequences. I talk about that all the time.
But that's just it. When you talk about how bias affects us, a bias in the workplace can be absolutely horrendous, and it can really affect people's productivity, groups' productivity. It can affect the whole company.
Hey, the Great Resignation, right? A lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people left their jobs because they were tired of the blind spots of the companies. So say for example, I have heard so many stories, Steve, of people who are doing the work, but they're not getting rewarded for the work, as in promotions, as in money, getting actual, raises, and even acknowledging what they've done. And so some people are like, you know what, I'm doing all this and somebody else keeps getting the $1 million payouts. I'm out of here. So
Yep.
this great resignation, it's more than just, and then they're leaving and going and taking a job where they're making less money, but their core values are being reached, if you will. And so that's, I'm sure there's all kinds of reasons why people lose their jobs. But I really believe that during the season that we're going through with the pandemic, that a lot of folks were like, you know what, I've had enough. I'm done. I'm going to go somewhere where I feel appreciated, where I can get the work done and also be acknowledged for my work.
That's I wrote down two things because two things. Well, here they are: bias by certificate and bias by position. So um, I've for decades I've preached that just because somebody has a certification does not necessarily mean that they're better equipped for a job or a position than someone else. But the bias that exists in our society today is if you went and got, and I'm going to use my dad as an example, right? And he's long since passed away. But if you went and got a welding certificate, you were eligible for, this much money coming right out of welder school. And sometimes, my dad, who'd been on the job 20 years, it would match his salary when we had no experience and he had 20 years in as a welder. And it was because the managers at the time thought that the certificate was the be all end all, right? And so there was a bias there that said the people with a certification were better than the people who had real world experience. By the same token, it's position. A lot of times, people give the manager or supervisor credibility over an employee, like you said, and even though the employee may have the knowledge, the expertise, the time and grade. I can use Vietnam was a really poor learning experience, but it was called uh, fragging. Let's see, it was called fragging. That's all. I'll just say it there. But what it amounted to is a lot of the first lieutenants, who we called shake and bakes, they went into the army with a college degree. They didn't have anything else going for them, so when they were drafted or brought in, they went right into officers candidate school. They got their lieutenant bars, and they were shipped over to Vietnam. Now there were some guys who'd been in country for a year, maybe second or third tour, and instead of the lieutenants walking in going, "Who's got seniority here?" and learning from that person, the lieutenant said, "I'm the lieutenant. I know what's going on and you'll follow me." Well, he would take them into these bad situations, and I won't say a lot of times, but the rumor was that it was called fragmentation. It was called fragging, and they would kill their own lieutenants because the lieutenant was endangering the unit for his lack of knowledge. And so in that case, the bias was that the lieutenant had preferential treatment when a lieutenant should have been briefed, "Hey, you're brand new to the country. If you're brand new to combat, listen to your sergeant, listen to your, NCOs who have the experience." Those are the things that really affect your attitudes and the outcomes, your bias in terms of what do you think you know versus what do you really know. So Latanya teaches you go out and you teach people bias, right? Or unconscious bias.
Yeah, and how to undo their bias and how to recognize it.
Well,
That's
tell me how to recognize. Recognize it. We got about 15 minutes. Let's talk about recognizing it and then what we might be able to do to
well, every
fix
part
it.
of your life is the same. You don't have any flavor in your life, I say, it's like it's the same routine. You eat at the same restaurant, you listen to the same music, you have all the same friends, you don't try to meet anybody new, you try to stay in your little comfort zone of sorts. Now, during a pandemic, I understand how that would be important, but we're talking about when you have the option to do well. Maybe your team's not winning. Maybe everything that you do that you think you're doing right, it's not producing the results that are expected. And there are times when uh the proof is in the pudding. It's like if you expect something different, you should probably do something different. But if you think that you know it all and that you just everything revolves around you, then that's a big blind spot and a big bias, and it makes the whole organization not as effective as it could be. And then also sometimes people are just afraid of other folks. If they don't come from their neighborhood, maybe even their same city or their same street, They're just afraid to ask other people for ideas or even chat with them or interact with them. I don't know why. But sometimes there's that blind spot there, or maybe something happened in their younger years where a loved one, a parent, a grandmother, or someone told somebody, hey, stay away from those people. They're not from, those are the so and so's.
But
Stay away from
how
this.
would I? But I wouldn't recognize that normally. I mean, that's just it. I might have them, but how would I know I have them? What do I have to look for in myself? How do I recognize a bias?
Well, how you recognize it is that well, okay, again, we got to start with the courageous part. First of all, do you want to recognize your bias? Let's just start there. This is the, rhetorical question. It's not just for you, but it's also for your listeners and those who are watching us. Do you want I mean, it is not an easy place sometimes to realize that there are some areas in our lives that we just really need to work on. And a great way to find out, Steve, is if we're getting performance appraisals. And say, for example, we've worked in different organizations, the people who they don't know us, know the folks who've given us the performance appraisal. If they don't know each other, but if what they're saying is the same, then that is an opportunity to be like, okay, it is me, because there's the denial factor. It wasn't me. That's not me.
I got to say,
I don't do that. But then how you find out, that's a good way, because if you've worked in different parts of the country and you keep getting the same reviews, regardless of who's giving you the review, then that is an excellent way of knowing, okay, it's me. I've got that issue. I've got that problem. And the courageous part is to say, okay, I'm going to work on me. And because I know that's the issue, it's going to take some time because I've got blind spots. And then, but the thing about it is, especially for those people who are in leadership and in the C-suite, when they get that knowledge, then sometimes they feel like they are keeping their employees or disappointing their employees. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to tell them that I've got these issues? But I want to tell you all that everybody already knows you've got these issues. They're your blind spots, not our blind spots.
This is no surprise to the people around you.
We already know. And if you are in a position to just humble yourself and say, hey, I'm working on this. It's a blind spot that's been removed. You all help me, y'all. I might mess up every once in a while, but just know that my heart is in the right place and I'm trying to fix this. Then you're going to get oh my God, people will probably start applauding and be like, oh, thank God, we have been praying for this moment, because we all see your blind spots. And now that you do, we're going to help you if you let us. So it's a courageous thing. Yeah, because
there's a thing out there that and I'll go back 40 years. A person came to me and they said, Steve, the guy I work with has bad breath. And they went, I mean, really bad breath. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to tell them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we ended up working out a deal so we could get that place. But that's the same thing. Mm-hmm. If you get upset, so if somebody came to me and said, Steve, you have bad breath, and I was embarrassed, of course I'm going to be embarrassed.
Right.
But instead of being embarrassed, I'm upset, right? I don't show it as embarrassment. I show it as anger. I show it as being perturbed at you, or you're the bearer of bad news and I'll hold it against you. When we talk about bias, people, if you are open to learning about you, when people come to you, see, now I had, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, I actually had somebody come up to me and say, hey, Steve, I haven't seen you in a long time. Can I give you one piece of advice? I went, yeah. And she said, would you take this piece of gum? And boom, guess what I knew? I needed a piece of gum. I went, absolutely, thanks a lot. And I put it in my mouth and I felt infinitely better then. I mean, I didn't even know I had a problem, but I felt better because now I had gum in my mouth, which was going to mask the bad breath, right? And so when you understand that, I could have been upset with her and she asked politely, can I give you a piece of advice? And I could have been upset with her. I could have been embarrassed and then frustrated and angry. How do you accept when people bring this information to you? How do you accept it, right? And that's the key to finding your biases, to be open to people. So if they come in, as Latonya just said, if somebody comes in and says, you're a jerk, you can be mad at them and you can call them names back. But truthfully, if you have enough people tell you you're a jerk, guess what? Part of you must be a jerk. And so you have to start figuring out how not to be a jerk. You might want to start asking those people, hey, a year ago, you called me a jerk. Yep. Well, am I still a jerk? Yep. Okay, explain to me, tell me why, right? And then ask the people, because the newest person who came in last week or got in a frustration with you and said, you're a jerk. go back to that person. So you've got 5 or 6 people in the last year who called you a jerk. Ask them and trust that they're going to tell you what the real answer is. And then you work on yourself, because that's the key. The key to overcoming bias and making other people happier is to find out how to make other people happier by overcoming your own biases, right, Latonya?
Well, there's so much to unpack there. Somebody's like, again, it's the denial factor. Am I going to be denial saying, I could have easily said, well, in this situation, the person could have easily said, no, I don't have offensive breath. But if that person thinks about it, when you're interacting with somebody, are people going like this? It's the body language thing. Learn to read the body language. So if you're speaking with someone right here, and somebody keeps going like this, and you're right here, and then you keep going like this, and you're like, hey, why are they doing that? There's a reason for that. So people are giving us signals all the time as far as body language, even on virtual platforms, letting us know, hey, you're doing something that's not making me feel comfortable. So there's a time when, again, it's the courageous thing. Are you open to change? Are you open to getting feedback? Sometimes people don't know how to say things, even those folks who get paid to tell you what you need to know. That's their job. But people don't like to deal with difficult issues. They don't like to do it. And as a result of that, it can go all through the organization. And then people are not happy coming to work because those who are at the top of the org chart aren't comfortable saying, hey, you got some BO, body odor. I live in Texas, and let me tell you, it gets hot. And in Texas, in the summer, my God, you might need to bring a couple of changes of clothes in the extreme times of the year, because it's so, and then some, wipes and, just whatever you can do, because it's just really that intense, so it takes courage to tell somebody, you need another shower or something, or maybe, don't, that same suit that you, this is a good one, that same suit that you biked here for 20 miles.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to wear that going into the meeting to close the deal with the big boss.
Yeah.
Maybe you should just bring a change of clothes if you're going to bike 20 miles, in a rainstorm or something. It's like, come on, let's think this through.
Yeah. What's that all about?
Yeah.
Hey, before we get too far away from this, Latonya, how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, I'd love for them to. Thank you, Steve. I am on social media at the UB Trainer. So that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and UB stands for unconscious bias. So the UB Trainer, and then
TrainOr?
ER, like a workout trainer, like when you go and get your muscles worked out.
Trainer.
ER. Thank you. Yes. And then also there's a website, theubtrainer.com. And I would really like and encourage for your viewers and viewers and listeners to go to that, because I've got podcasts, I've got blogs, and the blogs I think are pretty good. I've written over 100 of them. They're just little.
Oh, there was no bias there.
Well, of course there is. Bias, darling, including me, as I clutch my pearls. So they're really great, because in the moment when we're going through something as a nation, as the world, I try to write things that are relevant, so people have it like, this is going on in the world. What is the unconscious bias trainer's take on that? So the more information that we get, I think that's good, because we can be lifelong learners and we can find out more about, didn't think about that. So as we're creating our own worldview and it's being shaped around us, it's really a good idea to hear from as many perspectives as possible. Now, personally, I watch every newscast that I can. I watch Fox News, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, PBS NewsHour, NPR, as many as I can get in, because in a 30-minute segment, you cannot find out what's going on in the entire world. And maybe 4 minutes for commercials,
Yeah,
So
that's right.
So
and what's interesting about that is I don't watch any of those. I
but
don't watch
whatever you
any
watch,
news. See,
but
and
whatever
the
you
reason I don't watch any news is because it's almost always negative, and I just go, I don't care.
and
And
that's a bias
what
for
can
you.
I do about it anyway? My second wife was always a nutball for it. If they said a busload of people had crashed in Paraguay, she'd spend an afternoon or an evening just going, "Oh, I'm still thinking about those poor people." And you're like, "You didn't know any of them. You didn't have any way." But she would, empathize and get into it. I'm just like, no, I don't need to bring myself down by listening to news. So it's funny,
That's a
and I
bias
tell,
there too.
yeah, and I tell people all the time, if there's bad enough news, somebody on Facebook will tell you about
And there's also the online platforms as
it.
well.
Oh yeah, a
And
lot of
so
news
the thing
over there.
about it is that in our society today, sometimes people aren't getting all these different perspectives. And so as a result of that, they're really not aware of what's happening. And in some instances, we can piece together. It's like, look, I heard that over there, heard that over there. Well, maybe this is different from what I keep getting told. Like we were talking earlier about, the gossip or things that people are saying that aren't necessarily true. Like that one man, he caught the ball at the baseball game and he's ruined, history forever. No, there are different perspectives on that too. So I really encourage people, hear different sides, even if someone doesn't agree with you. That's a perfect time. Now, you may need to just kind of diffuse a little bit because it could be, pretty just like, what? But you might just need a minute. It's like, okay, calm down, or maybe a couple of days and come back and deal with it. And Steve, it's so important that everyone who's involved in the we'll just say the interesting conversation, that everyone have an opportunity to share and everyone have an opportunity to be heard. Because what
Yeah.
happens sometimes is they only hear from what we call the dominant voice, the loudest person in the room, and they're not giving the other people an opportunity to share and hear their perspective. And I have learned, as someone who loves to talk, as you might have figured out by now, but the people who are almost the ones who rarely share in a public meeting, they've got some of the best ideas. But
Oh yeah.
if we just know, including myself, know when to stop talking and to truly let that person know we're going to give you the mic. And when we give it to them, they might be like, wait a minute, are you really giving me the mic? So they may not answer in the right now, like you and I, we're ready. They might need a beat or two to be like, okay, are you really going to give me the mic? Can I really have it? And so for us, we're like, okay, they don't want to say anything. Move on. No, slow down. Give them an opportunity. Let them build trust with you and know that you really mean it. And then once they realize that, they're like, okay, it's going to take them a moment to reset. And it's going to take them a moment to get their words out because they express themselves differently than we do. And so as a result of that, that could be the answer that we have been waiting for. And I try to encourage people that I work with, train, speak, consult, etc. Listen to the voices that you don't hear much from. Because if they're not speaking, they are listening, they are observing, they are analyzing, and they're probably coming up with the solutions that are needed.
That's true. That's a lot of what's happening. So you have to make sure that you're all inclusive in what you do and how you're doing it. For the people sitting on the sides, people sitting in the back, make sure you ask their opinion, ask for their input. That's interesting. Brainstorming and having a meeting where you're asking for opinion. Brainstorming says I accept all people's opinions, good, bad, indifferent, and you can't criticize them in any way because it's somebody else's thoughts or ideas. And if you criticize them, then you'll shut them down from ever commenting again. So you have to have a brainstorming time as well as a meeting time. But anyway, that pretty much brings us up to the end of our podcast time. We're running out of time. So I really appreciate you being on, Latonya. This was really good. And I hope it sparks your memories and your ideas for your own biases or maybe someone else's biases. Maybe it's time to talk about people's biases, what they learn, what they need to learn, what they hear, what they don't hear. Those are all vital. Another minute to wrap this up for us, Latonya. You got something else?
Well, I do. And I just really want to emphasize, well, thank you for having me. But emphasis is, ladies and gentlemen, courage. Courage. It's worth the investment in yourself because it's not fair to the world for you to be stuck in an area when you've got so many gifts and so many things that you can do to help society at large. Are you willing to ask yourself the question, am I willing to take the courageous step to help myself, to improve myself, to really work on me and to be a better me? Do I have the courage for that? Am I going to be okay with what I find out? Am I going to be afraid of who I am? And if so, maybe find a safe space or accountability partners or other people who can really give you an opportunity to feel comfortable with yourself and to know that they're going to help you through it. But remember, sometimes when you're getting help, it still doesn't feel good. When I work out at the gym, honey, it doesn't feel good. But when I get the results that I love, I am showing everybody.
That's a good point. And how do they get in touch with you one last time?
Sure. It's theubtrainer.com. The U for unconscious, B for bias, trainer.com. And on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, I'm at the UB Trainer.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Latonya, for being on. Folks, you've been listening to Speaker Talks podcast as well as the Happiness Agenda. I'm Steve Sapato, your host, and you can reach me at steve@stevesapato.com with any questions or thoughts that you might have for one of our podcasts or one of our guests. So please reach out and make sure that you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Or if you're listening to us by chance on a little thing on LinkedIn, click the bell to make sure you get notified whenever we go live again. All right, been a pleasure. I hope you all got something out of today's episode, and we will talk to you again very soon. God bless.
Yeah.